I knew something was wrong the second the room went silent. Too silent for a company town hall filled with 200 employees and a live stream audience scattered across 3 continents. I felt it before he said it. A tightening in the air. A shift in Blake's posture. The way his hand gripped the microphone like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Then he said it. "You're suspended until you apologize to my ex." The words dropped like a metal tray on concrete, loud, humiliating, impossible to ignore. The room gasped, then laughed, first in ripples, then in waves. Phones lifted instantly. Screens glowed. Slack channels exploded. Someone in the back whispered, "Did he really just suspend his wife on Livestream?" The camera operator didn't help. He zoomed straight into my face, capturing every detail under those harsh LED lights, my stillness, my burning cheeks, the way my hand tightened around my tablet until my nails dug crescents into my skin. And in the front row, framed perfectly for every person watching online, sat Sienna, Blake's ex-wife, Chief Innovation Officer, smiling like she'd finally won a game she'd been rehearsing for years. I didn't shout. I didn't demand answers. I didn't crumble. I simply said, "All right," but inside, something shifted, a quiet click, like the final tumbler of a lock falling into place. They thought they humiliated me. They thought the suspension was the climax. They thought I'd walk out small, ashamed, finished, but none of them knew what I knew. None of them had read the old incorporation documents line by line the way I had. None of them remembered Section 14C buried deep in the operating agreement. None of them knew that the architecture holding the entire company together, every service, every pipeline, every firewall, was mine. And none of them were prepared for what would happen when the clock hit 12:01 a.m. Because while Blake tried to break me in public, he had no idea he'd just triggered the one clause capable of collapsing his entire empire. And I had no intention of warning him. People love to talk about the early days of a startup like it's some gritty romance. 2 dreamers. 1 apartment, a whiteboard stained with dry erase ink that never quite washes off, sleepless nights fueled by cold dumplings and ambition. Everyone conveniently forgets the mildew in the shower, or the arguments at 3 a.m. about whether the server logs needed restructuring. But if you ask me when Blake and I were the closest, it was during those nights in our Queens walk-up, when the rumble of the subway under our floorboards shook our dishes and we had to pause investor calls because the radiator sounded like a dying animal. Back then, it was simple. Blake had the charisma, the tie-loosening charm that made investors lean forward. I had the architecture, the code that turned his vision into something that actually worked. We balanced each other. When he got too grand, I grounded him. When I got buried in technical detail, he pulled me out long enough to pitch the bigger picture. We argued constantly, but never cruelly. And every night, no matter how late, we ended up on the couch with takeout cartons between us, laughing at how insane we were for even trying. We grew, unrealistically fast. That's what everyone said. VCs, mentors, other founders. HelixGate is a rocket ship. It felt like one. Especially when we raised our Series A and moved into our first real office. Exposed brick, concrete floors, giant windows, facing nowhere special, but we didn't care. We'd made it out of the apartment. We were building something real. Somewhere in that transition from survival mode to success, something in Blake shifted. Not all at once. More like a slow tightening, a recalibration of who he believed he was. The pitch decks started highlighting his leadership, his vision, his narrative. My section, technical development, became a bullet point instead of a story, a footnote instead of a pillar. The day our website relaunched was my first real warning. The homepage had a massive photo of Blake standing in front of a skyline, breeze in his hair, captioned, "The mind behind HelixGate." My picture? On the leadership team page, beneath 2 department heads we had hired 6 months prior. A picture so small you needed to zoom to see my face clearly. He brushed it off when I asked. Marketing thought a unified front would look more professional. It's not personal. The problem was, he said it like he believed it. Like it wasn't a choice someone made, it was simply how things worked. I swallowed it. First because it was easier. Then because I told myself I was being dramatic. Then because Blake had been my partner for too long, for me to imagine he'd do anything with intent to hurt me. That's what loyalty does. It blinds you slowly. The second warning came during a dinner with investors. We were at a trendy Manhattan rooftop restaurant where the drinks were served in glasses so thin I was afraid I might break one just by exhaling. I'd stepped away to the restroom, washed my hands, and heard Blake's laugh through the door as I returned. She's happier in the server room than in front of investors anyway. The table laughed. I froze in the hallway, fingers still damp. My stomach dropped in that specific way. Humiliation does, cold, sharp, spreading upward. When I returned to my seat, Blake smiled at me like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just trained a room full of millionaires to see me as a background character. That night I told myself he was performing, playing the humble, lovable tech bro who didn't cling to credit. But the truth stayed lodged under my ribs like a shard of glass. As the company grew, subtle things accumulated. Employees started bypassing me entirely. Engineers I'd personally hired would bring questions straight to Blake. Product managers would present my designs as our idea, then watch Blake nod approvingly without so much as a glance in my direction. I stopped correcting them. Not because I didn't care, because every time I did, the room chilled a few degrees and someone would comment about my tone. Then came the email I should have kept. Linda Graves, one of our early board members, a woman who didn't say much but noticed everything, sent it late, one Friday night. You should push for more visibility. You're carrying a lot of weight, more than Blake lets on. I stared at it for 10 minutes. Then I deleted it, because at the time, I was still loyal enough to think protecting Blake's ego was protecting our company, and protecting the company was protecting our marriage. It all blurred, but the rot had already started. And the moment Sienna Cole re-entered Blake's orbit, the moment she walked into Helix Gate in a cream blazer, all confidence and clean lines, I felt the ground shift under my feet. Sienna Cole entered Helix Gate the way a storm front rolls over, a quiet coastline, slow enough to see coming, fast enough that you still end up drenched. People loved her instantly. Investors, board members, new hires who didn't know any better. She had that polished confidence, that glossy charisma you only get from surviving a brutal divorce and learning how to weaponize charm. The day she was introduced as our new Chief Innovation Officer, Blake didn't look at me once. Not when he made the announcement, not when the applause started, not even when Sienna walked straight up to me afterward, extended her manicured hand, and said with a warm smile that didn't reach her eyes, "You must be Blake's wife." Not Evelyn, not CTO, not co-founder, just the title most useful to her. I shook her hand anyway. Her grip was firm, the kind people describe as strong for a woman, but it felt more like a silent assessment, like she was checking to see how easily I'd break. And then the small cuts began. Individually, they looked harmless. Together, they bled me dry. She started attending engineering meetings she had no reason to join. She'd sit beside Blake, crossing her legs, tossing out buzzwords that sounded futuristic but meant nothing in practice. "What if we pivot toward quantum-aligned machine learning pathways?" she'd ask, as if that phrase meant anything actionable. Blake would nod like she'd unlocked the secrets of the universe. I'd explain, calmly, why the idea was structurally impossible. She'd smile gently, tilt her head, and murmur, "Well, I'm just thinking big picture." I became the killjoy, the technical anchor, the woman who crushed ideas. Never mind that those ideas were nonsense. She also had a talent for repackaging my work. I'd mention an approach casually in a team session, an idea I hadn't formalized yet, still rough. 2 days later, she'd present it to Blake with a new name, shiny slides, and a tone implying divine inspiration. Blake would beam at her. Brilliant. Just brilliant. The first few times, I tried to clarify. "That's actually from the document I sent last week," I'd say carefully. Blake would wave a hand. "It doesn't matter who said it first. We're all on the same team." Except we weren't. The night I realized how deeply the narrative had warped was during a photo shoot for our Series C announcement. The photographer arranged Blake at the front, Sienna at his left, our CFO at his right, and then the rest of us in a staggered arc behind them. I was placed 2 rows back, behind a junior product manager who'd joined 6 months earlier. The photographer didn't even know I was a co-founder. He called me engineering lead. Blake didn't correct him. I went home that night and sat on the couch with my laptop open, and my old white mug with the words, "Built, not bought," warming my hands. That mug had been my pride once. I bought it the day we signed our Series A term sheet. Back then, it meant something. I'd built this thing. I had built it with my own hands, my own sleep-deprived brain, my own stubborn refusal to quit. Now it felt like a relic of a life I wasn't sure had ever really belonged to me. Over the next few months, the changes hardened. Blake started coming home later, always with an explanation that felt rehearsed. Investor dinner, board prep, strategy review with Sienna. She texted him constantly dings and buzzes that lasted long after midnight. If I asked what it was about, he'd say, "Work," in a clipped tone that dared me to challenge him. I didn't. Not because I trusted him completely, but because I was tired of fighting for visibility in my own company. Tired of explaining technical truths to a room full of people more interested in optics than outcomes. Tired of being the quiet backbone of a machine that kept pretending I didn't exist. Then came the near breach. Sienna pitched her revolutionary redesign, a framework that glittered in a slide deck but was riddled with holes any competent engineer would have noticed. I flagged them all, in writing, in meetings, in Slack. Blake brushed every warning aside. The board approved her plan. 2 weeks later, at 2 a.m, every alarm in our system went off. They didn't call Blake. They didn't call Sienna. They called me. I spent 6 straight weeks rebuilding the mess she'd made. Sleeping on the old server room chair, eating vending machine crackers, showering in the gym downstairs. Employees brought me coffee like offerings to a stressed-out deity. Blake never asked how I was. He never thanked me. He barely noticed I'd been gone. When I finally stabilized the architecture and prevented the breach, I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would acknowledge it. But at the next all-hands meeting, Blake congratulated our outstanding innovation efforts, and Sienna took a small bow as if she'd personally saved the company. It wasn't a knife in my back. It was death by needle. Slow, precise, almost elegant. The day Blake humiliated me on that stage was just the moment the poison finally reached my heart. I didn't cry after leaving that stage. I didn't even shake. I walked straight to the executive restroom, shut the door, and stared at my reflection under the cold fluorescent lights. My face was flushed, my eyes bright, not with tears, but with something sharper. A quiet, rising clarity. Someone had slapped a sticker onto the mirror months ago, a piece of corporate branding Blake loved to shove into every presentation. Own your impact. I used to laugh at it. Now it looked like prophecy. My phone buzzed. A message from Maya, my assistant. Found something weird in the old incorporation docs. Thought you should see. A pulse went through my chest. I remembered every tense meeting 7 years ago when we drafted those documents. I remembered insisting on a clause Blake barely skimmed, more interested in the champagne we'd bought on credit than the wording that would define our company's future. The IP reversion clause, Section 14, subsection C. If the CTO was suspended or terminated without proper arbitration and documented cause, all proprietary technology developed by the CTO reverted to their ownership, not the company's, theirs. I'd written the architecture. 90% of the core systems bore my fingerprints. Every redesign, every patch, every breakthrough, they all originated from the framework I'd created in that tiny Queen's apartment. Blake had never read the clause, but I had memorized it. So I walked out of the restroom with my head high and drove straight to NovaGuard Security Consulting, a tiny office I had quietly rented 3 years earlier. Back then it was my lab, a place to test ideas away from Blake's constant interference. Now it became the command center. I opened the operating agreement, verified the clause, then checked something I'd forgotten existed, an addendum from Blake's lazy attorney. A buried line stating that any derivative work based on core IP was also subject to reversion, meaning every single thing HelixGate had shipped in 7 years belonged to me at midnight. I set the license server migration, documented every step, saved every log. Then I wrote my rule for the game Blake wanted to play. No destruction, no chaos, just truth, enforced by the systems I built. When the clock hit 12:01, he would finally learn who held the blueprint. The night Blake humiliated me, the city felt colder than usual. Maybe it was the fall air. Maybe it was the adrenaline wearing off. Or maybe it was the simple truth that something in me had snapped clean. Not broken, snapped. A sharp, definitive shift, like a door slamming shut inside my chest. I didn't go home. I didn't want the sight of our condo, the illusion of partnership, the bed where Blake scrolled through messages from Sienna while pretending I didn't notice. I drove instead to a quiet building off Lexington, a space nobody at Helixgate knew existed except Maya, who once helped me carry an old monitor up the stairs. Novagard looked exactly the same as it had the day I signed the lease, a narrow room, cheap carpet, humming server racks, and a small desk wedged next to a window that faced a brick wall. To me, it was sanctuary. I unlocked the door, flicked on the lights, and exhaled the breath I'd been holding since Blake called me suspended in front of our entire company. The hum of the servers steadied me. Machines didn't lie. They didn't manipulate. They didn't care about politics or board optics or who smiled prettily on a live stream. They ran clean if the architecture was clean. And mine was flawless. I powered up my workstation, watching the screen bloom to life. The IP clause glowed back at me from the scanned agreement Maya had flagged. Section 14C. It was airtight, and the buried derivative clause in the addendum made it even clearer. Every redesign, every iteration, every patch based on my original architecture was legally tethered to me. Helixgate wasn't built on Blake's charm or Sienna's buzzwords. It was built on my code. At 10:43 p.m., I set up the new license server under Novagard. At 11:12, I routed the authentication dependencies. At 11:39, I uploaded the updated keys. At 11:52, I triple-checked the triggers. The cron job was scheduled for 12:1 a.m. No destruction. No sabotage. Everything would remain intact. Just unavailable. Unless they asked me for access. By midnight, the city outside had quieted enough that I could hear my own pulse. I sat in the dim light with my mug, built, not bought, warming my hands. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd bought that mug to celebrate building something with the person I loved. Now it reminded me I shouldn't have needed him at all. When the clock on my laptop ticked from 12 hours and 59 seconds to 12 hours 1 minute, a small notification blinked on my dashboard. License reassignment completed. No alarms. No drama. No explosions. Just a quiet transfer of truth back where it belonged. I gathered my things and walked into the night. For the first time in months, my shoulders felt lighter. The next morning, I woke up in my condo before dawn. Not because of stress, because of focus. I brewed coffee, the rich smell filling the kitchen. I poured it into my mug and stood by the window, watching the city stretch awake like some giant creature. Then my phone buzzed. Once, twice, 10 times. By the time I turned it over, I had 30 missed calls, a dozen texts, and a flood of Slack notifications. System failure. Access tokens invalid. Investor portal offline. Server authentication blocked. Then a message from Blake. Call me. Now. I didn't. Instead, I scrolled to a meme of a cat falling off a couch and laughed into my coffee. By 7:15 a.m., Blake burst into the kitchen, still in yesterday's wrinkled shirt, hair sticking up like he'd clawed at it all night. "Everything's down," he said, voice cracking. "The entire system. It says there's a licensing issue, but that's impossible. We own the—" He froze. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I just sipped my coffee. "You didn't," he whispered. "I didn't do anything," I said calmly. "The systems are functioning exactly as designed." He inhaled sharply. "Evelyn, please, you have to fix this." "I'm suspended," I said. "Remember? I can't work on Helixgate systems." His face paled. "This isn't funny." "No," I said. "It isn't." At 8 a.m., I walked into Helixgate, not as CTO, not as wife, but as the only person who could fix what was broken. The lobby was chaos. Employees clustered in frantic groups, security badges blinked red. Elevators were stuck on various floors. The receptionist looked like she might quit on the spot. "Evelyn, please just go up," she said when I approached, not even checking my name. I took the stairs. My heels echoed against the concrete, steady, unhurried. The executive floor was worse. Phones rang nonstop. People sprinted up and down the hallway. Someone was crying in the break room. Blake's assistant, Nora, spotted me and practically sagged with relief. He's in his office. It's bad. Really bad. I opened the door without knocking. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with panic. Jason Reed, the CTO in title only, looked like he'd aged 10 years since midnight. 2 IT managers huddled over laptops, whispering furiously. Daniel, our CFO, paced like a man trying not to hyperventilate. And Blake sat at his desk, eyes red, hands clenched into fists. When he saw me, something raw flickered across his face. "What are you doing here?" he snapped. "You're suspended." "I'm here as a vendor," I said. "Helen asked me to come." Helen Park, our legal counsel, stepped forward, clutching a folder like it was the last flotation device on a sinking ship. "We have a serious problem," she said quietly. "A very serious one." Blake gestured wildly. "We know. Everything's locked. We need Evelyn to—" "That's not the problem I'm referring to," Helen said. "Section 14. C has been triggered." Blake blinked. "What clause?" I sat down calmly, folding my hands. "The one you signed," I said. Helen opened the folder and slid the document across the table. As of 12/1 this morning, all proprietary technology developed by Evelyn Hart, including derivative works, has legally reverted to her ownership. Jason let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. Daniel stopped pacing. The IT managers stared like I'd just pulled a knife out of the table. Blake's face drained of color. "That can't be. Evelyn, tell them, you suspended me without documented cause," I said. "That's the trigger. The clause executed automatically." "You planned this," Blake shouted. "No," I said softly. "I planned for the possibility you'd forget who built your empire." Nobody spoke. The silence tasted like victory, not loud or gloating, just clean. And for the first time, I watched Blake understand what losing truly felt like. For a moment, no one in the room breathed. The only sound came from the server alarms chiming down the hallway, a constant reminder that the company Blake claimed to have built was running on architecture he never understood. Daniel sank into a chair, exhaling hard. "We're dead," he whispered. "If clients can't authenticate by noon, the Caldwell deal collapses. The board will implode." Helen remained calm, her voice surgical. "The clause is enforceable. It's clean, and it's binding." Blake stared at the papers like they were written in a language he'd never seen. "I don't believe this. Evelyn, why would you do this? We're supposed to be on the same team." I raised my eyes to him. "You made the team very clear yesterday." He flinched, just slightly, enough to make the room shift with discomfort. Jason cleared his throat. "Look, I know this is complicated, but if we want access restored, we need to negotiate with Evelyn." "I am not negotiating with my own wife," Blake snapped. "You're not negotiating with your wife," I corrected. "You're negotiating with the owner of the core IP." Jason nodded, almost respectfully. Daniel rubbed his temples. The IT managers exchanged looks like they were suddenly seeing me for the first time. Not the quiet workhorse, not the woman in Blake's shadow, the person who had written every line of the code they relied on. But the real shift came when Helen pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose and said, "We need to hear her terms." Blake's shoulders tensed. "Terms?" I let the silence hang before answering. "Full reinstatement as CTO, 40% equity, a board seat, a public correction acknowledging my role in building Helixgate, and Sienna's removal." Daniel let out a low whistle. Jason gave a small, approving nod. The IT managers froze like statues. Blake's face twisted. "Absolutely not. You're out of your mind. Evelyn, this is the only path," Helen cut in. "Blake, you suspended her illegally. You violated multiple procedural requirements. The IP reversion isn't a suggestion. It's executed. We have no leverage." "You're siding with her?" he demanded. Helen didn't blink. "I'm siding with the law." For a long, trembling moment, Blake didn't speak. He looked at me with a strange mix of anger, fear, and something almost like betrayal. But beneath it all was the realization dawning on him like a slow sunrise. He wasn't the one holding power anymore, not even close. I watched him try to calculate options. There were none. Finally, he muttered, I need a minute. He walked out of the room, slamming the door so hard one of the IT managers winced. The second the door clicked shut, the tension dissolved like air releasing from a balloon. Jason sank into a chair with a long, tired breath. You know, he said, I always suspected you had a contingency plan. I just didn't think it was this elegant. It wasn't a plan, I said quietly. Just a clause I never expected to use. But you used it, he said. And thank God you did, because the alternative was Sienna running this place into the ground. The mention of her name pulled the mood darker. I didn't have to ask what they meant. Everyone at Helixgate had experienced the chaos she'd caused, from her nonsensical strategy shifts to her inexplicable ability to talk Blake into decisions that defied reason. At 9:42 a.m., Maya arrived, breathless, clutching a folder. Her eyes widened when she saw the scene. Is it bad? Worse than bad, Jason said. But she's saving us. Maya smiled at me, small but fierce. I knew you'd take back what was yours. I felt a warmth in my chest I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. At 10 a.m., Blake returned. His face was pale, jaw clenched, eyes glassy with the kind of shock reserved for people who realize their power is paper thin. We'll negotiate, he said. He looked everywhere but at me. Helen called for a closed-door session. The others stepped out, leaving just the three of us. Blake sat down heavily. I stayed standing. He swallowed. Evelyn, do you really want to do this? I folded my arms. I didn't want any of this. I wanted respect. I wanted credit. I wanted a marriage that didn't require me to disappear so you could feel significant. That's not fair, he whispered. It's generous, I replied. He rubbed his eyes, exhausted. Fine. What do you want me to say? That I messed up? That yesterday was wrong? I know it was stupid. I was frustrated. Sienna said. I raised a hand. Stop. He did. This isn't about yesterday, I continued. This is about 7 years. His jaw tightened. Are you really going to destroy the company we built because of one mistake? I'm not destroying anything. I'm restoring balance. He shook his head slowly, unable to argue but desperate to find leverage. If I agree to this, the board will know I caved. Good, I said. Let them see the consequences of your choices. For the first time since I'd met him, Blake looked small. Not because he lacked power, but because he finally understood it had never been his alone. By 10:37 a.m., the negotiation was complete. He accepted every term. He didn't have a choice. Helen recorded the agreement, documented the signatures, and processed everything through internal channels with mechanical precision. The moment she stepped out, I remained alone in the office for a few seconds. The sunlight through the window cast long shadows across the floor. The screens displayed rows of red error messages, each one a heartbeat of the empire he thought he controlled. I touched the surface of the conference table, feeling its cold glass under my fingertips. Then I walked out. The hallway was quieter now. People stopped whispering. A few nodded at me, uncertain, wary, respectful. The atmosphere had shifted. I wasn't invisible anymore. As I passed the rows of cubicles, I caught sight of the server room through the glass wall. My old swivel chair was still there, tucked in the corner like a memory waiting to be acknowledged. I paused. For years, that chair held every version of me, from the ambitious engineer to the exhausted co-founder to the ghost drifting behind Blake. But now it belonged to someone reborn. At 11:22 a.m., the final access keys synced, the systems unlocked. Helixgate came back online like a creature taking its first breath after drowning. And the world, my world, shifted again. Because power wasn't something I took back. It was something I remembered I'd always had. For about 3 hours after Helixgate came back online, the building hummed with an uneasy, fragile calm. People whispered. Slack channels exploded with theories. Doors opened and shut too loudly. Every conversation felt like it ended with, "But did you hear what she did?" By noon, The shock had settled enough for panic to evolve into something more potent. Retaliation. It began with Blake. The first call came while I was in the elevator, heading down to grab lunch for the first time in days. The screen lit up with his name. I let it ring. He called again, then again. By the fifth call, I answered. His voice was raw. "Evelyn, we need to talk." "We just did," I said. "This is different." "It never is." The line crackled with the sound of him trying to steady his breathing. "The board is furious. They think I mishandled everything. They're saying you ambushed us." I leaned against the elevator wall, feeling the cold metal through my blazer. "I didn't ambush anyone. I enforced the contract you signed." He exhaled sharply, frustration spilling through the phone. "You're making this impossible." "Good," I said. "Maybe you'll finally understand how impossible you've made things for me." I hung up before he could reply. By the time I stepped into the street, the sunlight felt harsher, like the city itself was reflecting the tension boiling inside Helix Gate's walls. I walked 2 blocks before I noticed a new notification on my phone, an unexpected one, from Sienna. I hesitated before opening it. She wasn't the type to complain directly. She preferred subtle sabotage, strategic whispers, and privately curated narratives. Her message was short, precise, venom dipped in honey. "You're going to burn this company down just to feel powerful? I thought you were smarter than that." I stared at the text, a bitter laugh slipping out before I could stop it. The projection would have been hilarious if it wasn't so pathetic. I typed back one sentence. "Clean up your patent fraud before lecturing me." I didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, I slid the phone into my pocket and kept walking, the city noise filling the tension she left behind. By the time I returned to the office, the pressure had intensified. People avoided my eyes. The air felt electrically charged, a storm gathering inside fluorescent-lit hallways. When I stepped into my temporary office, a room the size of a broom closet HR, called Transition Space, I found Maya waiting with wide eyes and a laptop clutched to her chest. "I think you should see this," she said. She pulled up Slack. Screenshots. Rumors. Entire threads speculating about my unstable behavior, about how I'd emotionally manipulated Blake, about how the system outage was a revenge tantrum. None of the rumors had names attached. Cowards never sign their work. Next came the phone call from Victor Huang, a board member too pragmatic to bother with morality. "Evelyn," he said without greeting, "I don't care about your marriage. I care about valuation. You hold the IP, so I need to know, is this company stable or isn't it?" "It is," I said, "as long as people stop pretending I don't exist." A pause. Then, "I'll support your terms." Not kindness, just calculation. At least he was honest. After the call, Helen knocked softly on my door and stepped inside. She closed it behind her with a sigh that told me the worst wasn't over. "They're pushing back," she said quietly. "Who?" "Everyone. PR is panicking. Blake is furious. And Sienna is spinning stories like her life depends on it." I sat down. "Let me guess. I'm the vindictive wife staging a coup." Helen's lips twitched humorlessly. "Something like that. They want to renegotiate the deal." "Absolutely not. I told them the same." She hesitated. "But I think you should know. There's another option." I raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "Take a smaller equity stake. Keep your board seat. Drop the demand for Sienna's removal. They'll process everything quietly, minimize blowback, let you return to normal operations." For a moment, the words sounded tempting. Easier, cleaner, less exhausting. A future where the whispers would fade, where the board wouldn't resent me, where Blake might actually stop looking at me like I'd set fire to his life. But then I remembered the cold auditorium, the laughter, the LED screen with accountability and respect glowing above Blake's head, his voice slicing through me like a knife. "You're suspended until you apologize to my ex." I remembered 7 years of erasure. I remembered the server room chair and the nights I slept there while he basked in applause built on my architecture, and the temptation vanished. "No," I said. Helen nodded, almost relieved. "Good. I hoped you'd say that." The afternoon grew heavier. Meetings piled up. People watched me the way villagers watch a dragon they aren't sure is sleeping or hungry. Every footstep, every whisper, every shift of tone carried weight. But the breaking moment, the one that cracked the thin shell of order, happened at 3:12 p.m. Maya burst into my office, breathless. "They're trying to pin the instability on you." "Who?" "PR. A few board members." "And?" She swallowed. "Blake." For a second, the world went still. I felt my heartbeat once, loud, like a fist hitting a wall. Of course he was. Of course, he'd rather sacrifice me than admit he'd lost control. I took a slow breath. "What's their angle?" "That you triggered the outage to force a negotiation." "I didn't force anything. The contract did." "I know," Maya said. "But the optics." I held up a hand. "I'm done sacrificing truth for optics." Before she could answer, my phone buzzed again. A message from Blake. "We need to talk. Now." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back one line. "Say it in front of the board." I sent the message and set the phone face down on the desk. For a moment, the room felt unnaturally quiet, almost padded, like the world was holding its breath. Then, slowly, the building's noise returned. Murmurs in the hallway, the hum of air vents, footsteps moving with purpose and panic. Helix Gate was unsettled, and no one knew which way the ground would shift next. At 3:25 p.m., Blake requested an emergency board meeting. At 3:31, Helen appeared in my doorway, expression neutral but eyes sharp. "They're gathering upstairs," she said. "You don't have to attend if you don't want to." "I want to." She nodded like she expected that answer. "Then brace yourself." We took the elevator to the executive floor. The doors opened to a hallway too bright, too white, too still. When we reached the boardroom, voices spilled through the glass, tense, overlapping, desperate. Blake's voice rose above them all. "This isn't about ownership or contracts. This is about stability. She can't hold us hostage like this. It's dangerous. Dangerous." The word hit with a surprising sting. Not because I feared it, but because it revealed how deep Blake was willing to dig. He wasn't just protecting himself anymore. He was rewriting the story, recasting me as the threat, the unstable element. Helen placed her hand on the door handle, looked at me once, then pushed it open. Every head turned. Blake's face drained of color. Sienna, sitting beside him like a second shadow, stiffened. A few board members straightened in their seats, trying to appear neutral, though their eyes flicked over me with thinly veiled curiosity. I walked in slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch. I didn't sit. I didn't smile. I stood at the head of the table, not where Blake sat, not where power was traditionally placed, but where truth cut most clearly. "Say it," I said to Blake. "In front of everyone." He swallowed. "Evelyn, this isn't—" "Say what you wrote," I said. "Say why we're here." The board members shifted, sensing a collision they'd have to witness up close. Finally, Blake exhaled, defeated. "I told them the outage was triggered intentionally." "And did I?" I asked. He didn't answer. I looked around the table. The outage was automatic, triggered by a clause Blake signed voluntarily, triggered because he suspended me publicly, humiliatingly, without proper procedure. I didn't break anything. I simply followed the rules he ignored. One board member cleared her throat. "We're well aware of the clause," Helen briefed us. Blake's head snapped toward Helen with betrayal flashing through his expression. "She's our legal counsel," I said. "Her job is to brief you." Sienna leaned forward, arms crossed. "This entire situation is out of control. Evelyn, you're making things worse. The company can't survive if everyone is afraid of you." "Afraid?" I repeated. Interesting word choice. "You're weaponizing your position," she said. "Just like you weaponized the system last night." I met her gaze. "You mean the system you pitched into near failure last quarter?" Her cheeks flushed. The room exhaled all at once. Blake tried to regain control, but it slipped through his hands like water. "This isn't productive." "You're right," I said. "Let's make it productive." I pulled out a stack of printed documents, my system architecture, commit histories, internal emails, product timelines. I laid them out across the table like evidence in a trial. This is what I built. 7 years of it. Every framework, every redesign, every emergency patch. I tapped the papers. If you want stability, you need the person who designed the spine of your company, not the person who pretends to understand it. Jason shifted in his seat across the table. I can confirm everything she's saying, he said. Evelyn did the heavy lifting. All of it. The room fell quiet. For a long moment, the board simply sat there, absorbing a truth they had been too comfortable ignoring. A few exchanged glances with growing recognition, the kind that came when reality could no longer be denied. Victor finally broke the silence. What exactly do you want, Evelyn? My original terms. And if we refuse? Another member asked. Then Helix Gate has no legal right to the architecture it runs on, I said calmly. Which means you don't have a product, you don't have clients, and you don't have valuation. The words settled like dust across polished wood, heavy, inevitable. Sienna leaned back, arms folded, mouth tight. Blake stared down at the table, jaw working. The man who once believed he could charm any room suddenly had nothing to say. Victor nodded slowly. I support her terms. A beat passed. The company survives only if she stays. One by one, the other board members voiced agreement, even the ones who'd spent months pretending not to notice I existed. Blake didn't speak. He didn't need to. The vote moved without him. When it was done, when every term was reaffirmed, every condition accepted, every consequence made official, I finally let myself inhale deeply. The room felt different. Not safer. Not warmer. Just honest. As the meeting concluded, people filed out quickly, eager to escape the tension lingering in the air. Only Blake and Sienna stayed seated. I turned to leave, but Blake's voice stopped me. What do you really want, Evelyn? He asked. But this time the question wasn't angry. It was hollow. Lost. Why go this far? I paused by the door. I'm not the one who went too far, I said quietly. I'm the one who stopped pretending it didn't matter. I walked out before he could respond. The hallway outside was dimmer, quieter. A strange calm rippled through me, not peace exactly, but something close enough to recognize its shape. A steadiness. A center I hadn't felt in years. Maya caught up to me halfway down the corridor. How'd it go? It's done, I said. All of it? She asked, voice small. For now. She nodded, but worry flickered through her eyes. They're not going to take this gracefully. I know, because complications don't end when the truth is spoken. They grow teeth, they fight back, and people who are losing power rarely do it quietly. But there was something else, something deeper that filled my chest as we stepped into the elevator. A quiet, controlled certainty. The storm wasn't over, but neither was I. The day of the confrontation began with a sky the color of steel, flat, unbroken, metallic. The kind of sky that made the whole city feel like it was holding something in. I didn't sleep much the night before, but not because of anxiety. My mind was too sharp, too alert, every thought crisp like winter air. For the first time, the exhaustion of the past months didn't feel heavy. It felt purposeful. At 7:12 a.m., I dressed quietly, choosing a charcoal blazer, black trousers, and a simple white blouse. No jewelry, no softness. My armor was clean lines and clarity. The mug sat waiting on the counter. Built, not bought. I poured hot coffee into it, the smell rising like a reminder. You earned every inch of this. No one gave it to you. By the time I stepped outside, the morning rush had begun. Cars honking, steam billowing from subway grates, commuters speed walking toward offices that probably felt safer than mine did. I hailed a cab instead of taking the subway. Today wasn't about blending in. Today was about walking into the storm with my spine straight. The executive floor of Helix Gate was already chaotic when I arrived. Papers shuffled, doors slammed, people whispered urgently. The tension was a physical thing, layered in the air like static. A few employees glanced at me with wide eyes. Others looked away quickly, afraid that acknowledging me might put them on the wrong side of history. In the middle of all this, Nora, the assistant I'd known since she was an intern, approached with trembling hands. They're waiting for you, she said. Blake wants to start as soon as everyone's there. She didn't need to say more. The board had called for a second emergency session, But this time, it wouldn't be contained behind closed doors. This time, key department heads, senior engineers, and legal would observe. Not vote, observe. A transparency gesture forced by panic. I thanked her and walked toward the boardroom, heels striking the floor with a steady rhythm. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't rage. It was inevitability. The glass walls of the boardroom revealed everything before I even entered. The long table gleamed under bright ceiling lights. Multiple screens displayed error logs, and the words licensee compromised in red, though the systems were already restored. Some people refused to change the screen's symbolic stubbornness. Blake stood near the window, talking rapidly to Victor and Daniel. His movements were jerky, anxious, uncalibrated. He looked thinner than he had weeks ago, as if stress had scraped pieces off him overnight. Sienna sat at the table, legs crossed, posture immaculate, but her eyes gave her away. They tracked me the moment I appeared in the doorway, widening just a hair, then narrowing into something cold and calculating. Jason sat farther down the table, shoulders tense, tapping a pen without realizing it. Helen stood at the far end, documents organized neatly in 2 stacks, one for the existing agreement, one for whatever came next. When I stepped into the room, the air shifted. Some people straightened, others stiffened. A few exchanged glances like they were witnessing a courtroom moment instead of a company discussion. Nobody said a word. I took my place at the table, not sitting, but standing with my hands lightly resting on the back of an empty chair. Not dominating the space, holding it. Blake turned, and for the first time since our early days, I watched genuine fear cross his face. Not fear of me hurting him. Fear of losing control. Fear of losing the narrative he'd wrapped himself in. "Let's get started," he said, voice unsteady. Victor cleared his throat. "We agreed Evelyn should speak first." Blake shot him a look but didn't argue. He stepped back, trying to appear composed. I let the silence stretch. Then I spoke. What happened 2 days ago wasn't a miscommunication. It wasn't an impulse or a misunderstanding or a bad moment taken out of context. It was the culmination of 7 years of erasure. 7 years of downplaying my work. 7 years of decisions made above me, around me, despite me, because you. I glanced at Blake, then at Sienna, believed I was easier to diminish than to confront. A murmur rippled down the table. I continued. But the systems I built don't lie. The logs don't lie. The architecture doesn't lie. And the contract doesn't lie. Victor leaned back, nodding in quiet approval. Sienna straightened in her chair. "No one is denying your contributions, Evelyn. But this is about stability. It's about optics. This is about ownership," I cut in. "And accountability. The same accountability that was preached on stage while Blake publicly suspended me to impress you." The memory flickered across several faces. Some winced. Blake stepped forward, palms up. "Evelyn, I told you I was wrong." I panicked. The moment got out of hand. "But this," he gestured to the room. "This isn't the way." "Maybe it's the only way," I said. "You ignored every other one." He swallowed. "We can fix this privately. This company stopped being private the moment you humiliated me on a live stream." Gasps. Someone at the far end coughed into their sleeve. "We're not here," I continued, "to negotiate whether I deserve a seat at this table. We're here because you forced the architecture of this company into a crisis you created." Blake's jaw tightened. "Enough. We're all tired. We all want a resolution." "Then follow the terms you agreed to," I said. "Reinstate me. Approve my equity. Approve my board seat. Remove Sienna. Release a public statement correcting the narrative." Sienna sputtered. "Remove me? For what? Because you're insecure?" I didn't look at her. "For incompetence that caused a near breach. For misrepresenting my work as yours. For influencing decisions that violated our operational agreements. For attempting to file a patent based on architecture you didn't create." The last line hit like a dropped glass. Several people turned sharply toward Sienna. Her jaw slackened. Her voice cracked. "That's a lie." Helen lifted a folder. "We have the documentation." Sienna's face drained. "You don't understand. That patent was fraud," I said. "Strategy," she snapped back. "Against your own company?" Jason said sharply from down the table. "Against the woman who wrote the code you keep pretending to understand." Sienna glared. I was protecting Helixgate's future. No, I said. You were protecting your proximity to power. The room trembled with tension, not loud, but heavy, like someone had pulled oxygen out of the air. Then Naomi, one of Helen's junior legal staff, slipped quietly into the room holding a tablet. Her face was pale, eyes wide. She handed the tablet to Helen and whispered something too low to hear. Helen scanned the screen, then her jaw set in a hard line. We have a bigger problem, she said. The room froze. Helen turned the tablet around so everyone could see. A PDF displayed across the screen a patent application, the same one we'd already discussed. But this time, everyone could see the submission date, 1 week ago, and more importantly, the listed inventor, Sienna Cole. The application title, System and Method for Distributed Threat Intelligence Architecture. My design, my life's work. A low rumble of shock moved through the room. Daniel whispered, "Oh my God," Jason muttered. "Unbelievable." Blake stared at the screen like it was a death sentence. Sienna tried to compose herself. "That's not, you don't understand how patents work. It's just a protective filing until legal reviews." "It's not. Did you or did you not claim to be the inventor?" Helen asked. Silence. Sienna's lips trembled. I submitted under instruction." "Whose instruction?" I asked. Another silence. Then, she made the fatal mistake of her career. "Blake told me to." The room erupted not loudly, but sharply. Gasps. Stirring. Chairs shifting. People leaning forward in disbelief. Blake stared at her, horror breaking across his face. "I never, Sienna. What are you?" But she'd said it. Out loud. In front of everyone. She tried to recover, but it was too late. "I mean, he said we needed stronger IP positioning." He said, he implied. "No," Blake said, voice cracking. "No, I never." "Enough," Victor said. "We don't need spin. We need truth." The room quieted. Sienna's shoulders sank. She looked down at her hands, then at me, eyes narrowed, voice low. "You're going to destroy everything." "No," I said. "I'm finally stopping you from doing it." The boardroom went silent again. Not buzzing, not whispering, just silent. It was the silence of power shifting, the silence of masks falling, the silence before consequences take shape, and the silence before the final blow. The silence didn't break all at once. It cracked in tiny places. First, in the way Daniel's pen slipped from his fingers and clattered against the glass table. Then, in the way one of the IT managers muttered, "Jesus," under his breath, too stunned to catch himself. Jason leaned back slowly, as if trying to physically reorient himself inside a room that suddenly had different gravity. Victor spoke first. He always did when there was blood in the water. "This changes things," he said. Understatement of the year. Helen kept her gaze on Sienna. "Filing a patent on technology you didn't create isn't just an internal policy issue," she said calmly. "It's fraud, potentially federal, if pursued." Sienna's composure frayed at the edges. "You're overreacting. This is how the industry works. Everyone files broad patents. Everyone stakes out IP strategically. That's what I was doing for the company. For yourself," I corrected. "The assignee on that application is you, not Helixgate." All eyes swung back to the tablet. My name was nowhere on the document. Neither was the company's, just hers. Blake rubbed his forehead like he could scrub the last 5 minutes out of existence. "Why would you do that?" he whispered. Sienna's eyes flashed. "You told me I needed to secure my position. You said the board was circling. You said, I never told you to steal her work," he snapped, pointing at me before he could stop himself. The board watched him with new calculation. It wasn't just that he'd lost control of the narrative. It was that his judgment was now evidence. Helen folded her hands. "Regardless of who encouraged what, the facts are simple. A senior executive attempted to claim ownership of core IP she did not develop. If that patent had been granted uncontested, Helixgate's rights to its own architecture would be undermined. Our contracts with clients could be voided. Our valuation would crater," Victor finished. "We're sitting on a bomb that hasn't gone off yet." Sienna straightened, clutching at the last thread she could find. "We can fix it. I'll withdraw the application. I'll sign whatever you want. This doesn't have to be a witch hunt." "It's not a witch hunt," I said. "It's a mirror." Her eyes snapped to mine. "You think you're some kind of hero because you pulled one clever legal trick." I almost laughed. "Hero? No. Heroes save everyone. I was just trying to stop them from burning down the thing I built." "This isn't about being a hero," I said. "It's about not letting you rewrite my history." Linda, who'd been quiet until now, finally spoke. "We can't keep her," she said simply. "Even if we wanted to, even if we could spin this internally, any serious due diligence is going to surface that filing. The liability is enormous. A low murmur of agreement circled the table. Sienna's face hardened. So you all just throw me away? After everything I've done? After all the doors I've opened for this company? You tried to lock one, Daniel said dryly. Around our necks. Helen closed the folder with a soft, decisive thud. My recommendation is termination for cause, effective immediately. Security escort. Access revoked. Immediate notice to outside counsel to challenge the patent and document Helix Gates' rights to the IP, anchored in Evelyn's work. The words, for cause, hung in the air like a verdict. All eyes drifted to Blake. For years, decisions like this had been his stage. He'd been the man who fired and hired, who framed harsh moves as visionary leadership. Now he looked like someone who'd wandered into a play halfway through and realized he'd lost the script. He glanced at Sienna. For a flicker of a second, I saw it, the old loyalty, the shared history, the ugly divorce he never fully unpacked, the part of him that still believed they understood each other in ways no one else did. Then he looked at me, not as his wife, not as his CTO, just as the person whose name should have been on that patent. Something in his face crumpled. Do it, he said hoarsely. Sienna recoiled like he'd slapped her. Blake, he didn't look away. You lied to me. You lied to them. You almost cost us everything because you were too afraid to own what you did, she shot back. You used me. Don't pretend you didn't. Their words lashed across the room like whips. Pieces of conversations I wasn't part of, choices I hadn't seen, emotions I hadn't been invited to witness. For a moment, it was like Blake and I had switched places. Now I watched him become the invisible one. Helen signaled toward the door. Security had been waiting outside. Tom, the older guard who'd seen the company grow from 15 people in a shared space to this glass box in the sky, stepped in with another guard beside him. Miss Cole, Helen said formally, your employment with Helix Gate is terminated, effective immediately. A separation agreement will be sent to your counsel. For now, please surrender your badge and all company devices and gather your personal belongings under escort. Sienna stared at her, then at Blake, then at me. You'll regret this, she whispered. You already do, I replied. She rose slowly, pride propping up every movement. She unclipped her badge, placed it on the table with a sharp, final click, and straightened her blazer. As she walked past me toward the door, she paused, leaning just close enough that only I could hear. You didn't win, she said. You just made yourself a bigger target. I held her gaze, steady. Then I'll stop acting like one of your decoys. Something flickered in her eyes, anger, respect, maybe both. Then she turned and walked out between the two guards, the door closing behind her with the softest hiss. For a moment, no one spoke. The absence of her presence was almost louder than her voice had been. Then Victor exhaled. Well, he said. That's one problem addressed. One, I echoed. Not the only one. I turned back to the table. We still haven't dealt with the fact that this company was built on my work while I was steadily erased from its story. Linda nodded. We're not ignoring that. Blake slumped into his chair, staring at the glass like it might break open and swallow him. We already agreed to your terms, he said faintly. Board seat, equity, CTO, statement. What else do you want? I studied him for a long moment. This was the part where, in someone else's story, the woman might relent, might decide humiliation and chaos were punishment enough, might call it even and choose the cleaner exit. I wasn't in someone else's story. I want clarity, I said. Not just on paper. In front of all of them. I gestured toward the glass wall. Outside, department heads and senior staff hovered in the corridor, pretending to check their phones while blatantly watching. They couldn't hear us, but they could feel the shift in gravity. Bring them in, I said. Victor's eyebrows lifted. All of them? Anyone whose work depends on the systems I built, I replied. They deserve to know who's been holding this up from the shadows. Helen studied my face for a beat, then nodded. I'll authorize it. Within minutes, the boardroom expanded from private theater to public reckoning. Chairs scraped, people shuffled in, lining the walls, filling every available space. Jason stood near the screens, arms folded. Daniel hovered by the corner, jaw tight. Maya slipped in quietly and took a spot by the door, eyes flicking between me and Blake, absorbing every detail like she was backing up reality in her own mental server. When the room was packed, executives along the table, senior engineers and managers along the walls, assistants pressed near the back, Helen raised a hand. Everyone, she said, voice carrying with practiced authority. We're in the middle of a critical discussion regarding Helix Gates' IP, leadership structure, and governance. You're here because your work intersects directly with those issues. She glanced at me, then stepped aside. The floor was mine. I let my gaze move slowly around the room. Faces I'd known since they were scared new hires. Faces I'd seen get promoted by parroting other people's work. Faces I'd watched look right through me when Blake entered. "If you've worked here longer than a year," I began. "You've used systems I designed. You've pushed code into frameworks I wrote. You've watched monitors that run on architecture I built from scratch in a Queens apartment where the radiator screamed all night." A few heads lowered, a few lifted. "For 7 years, I was introduced as head of engineering, lead developer, Blake's wife," I said. "I watched my co-founder title vanish from pitch decks. I watched my photo shrink on the website. I watched ideas lifted out of my documents and presented like they'd appeared out of thin air next to someone else's name." No one interrupted. "That story was convenient," I went on. "It made our brand cleaner. It made investors more comfortable. It made some egos easier to manage. But it was never true." I turned toward Blake. "Tell them," I said quietly. "Tell them who built the core architecture. Tell them who rebuilt it when it almost collapsed. Tell them whose work Sienna just tried to patent." Blake looked trapped. Not by me, but by the accumulation of his own choices. He glanced at the glass, at the rows of people who'd followed him, defended him, bragged about working for him. People who'd believed he always knew what he was doing. People who now watched him in silence. He swallowed. "Evelyn did," he said, voice rough. "She built it. The core systems, the security framework, the redesign after the near breach, all of it." The room didn't gasp. It didn't need to. The lack of surprise said more than any reaction could. I nodded once. That's why the contract recognized my ownership, before any of us knew how much we'd need it. That's why, when I was suspended without cause, the systems reverted back to me. The company didn't break. I let that sink in. The illusion did. I scanned their faces, fearful, curious, ashamed, relieved. "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about alignment between reality and power. If I'm going to carry the responsibility I already have, then I'm going to hold the authority that matches it, not behind the scenes, not as a favor, as a fact." Behind me, Helen nodded. "The board has approved Evelyn's reinstatement as Chief Technology Officer and her appointment as a voting board director, with 40% equity," she said, tone cool and formal. "Those decisions are final. This meeting is not to debate them, it's to acknowledge them, and, whether anyone liked it or not, to make sure no one in this room could ever again pretend they didn't know who built the system they were standing on." The moment the announcement settled, the room shifted. Not dramatically, not with gasps or applause, but with the slow, unmistakable tilt of gravity when everyone realizes the person they underestimated is the one holding the ground steady beneath them. Shoulders straightened. A few heads bowed. Some eyes darted away, unable to meet mine. Others, especially among the engineers, watched with something like awe or guilt or both. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I didn't even breathe deeply. Everything inside me was still, sharp, suspended. Blake rubbed the bridge of his nose like he could massage his way back into control of a narrative he'd already lost. "We have a company to stabilize," he murmured. "We need Evelyn's cooperation. So let's..." "Cooperation?" I cut in. The word tasted metallic. Helen looked between us, poised like a referee who'd learned to predict the swing of a punch before it came. "We're not here to relitigate the suspension," she said. "We're here to formalize the structural changes and ensure operational continuity." "Continuity," Jason echoed quietly, almost to himself. The screens behind him still flashed red banners. License invalid. Access denied. Reauth required. Even the system's panic looked tidy under my architecture. I exhaled slowly, then turned back to the room. "We'll restore access," I said. "Today. But only after the paperwork is signed and the chain of authority is corrected." A ripple of relieved tension moved through the staff. Engineers leaned forward. The IT managers exchanged looks of pure exhaustion. That part wasn't personal. They were caught in the crossfire of choices they hadn't made. I wouldn't punish them for that. "Helen," I said, "let's finalize the documents." Helen opened her laptop. "We have drafts prepared. Equity reallocation. CTO reinstatement. Board seat with full vote. Public acknowledgement of contributions. Severance and termination for Miss Cole. And structural adjustments to prevent unilateral executive suspensions outside arbitration." Blake flinched slightly at the last line. The board didn't miss it. I didn't either. A junior operations manager raised her hand at the back of the room, tentative. Does that mean Blake can't suspend anyone anymore?" Victor actually snorted. "It means Blake can't suspend his co-founder on a live stream without due process," he said dryly. A few stifled laughs flickered through the crowd. Blake stiffened. The power dynamic had flipped, and it wasn't flipping back. "Let's keep this professional," Blake said, trying to regain footing. "We're going to move forward as a team. That's what matters." I looked at him. Really looked. At the man who used to share takeout noodles with me on the floor of our old apartment. The man who kissed me between deployment pushes. The man who'd once told me we were building something no one else could because we trusted each other more than anyone. He wasn't that man anymore. Or maybe he never was, and I'd been too busy writing code and fixing crises to notice. Linda cleared her throat, turning her laptop toward the board. "Let's vote," she said. The board didn't need a presentation. They didn't need more debate. They'd seen enough. One by one, they raised their hands. All in favor of the new structure as outlined. Unanimous. Even Blake lifted his hand last, slow and resigned. The final nail wasn't loud. It didn't echo. It slid into place with the quiet inevitability of something long overdue. When the vote concluded, Helen typed the last approval, hit enter, and closed her laptop. "It's official," she said. "Congratulations, Evelyn." The room didn't break into applause. That wasn't the tone. But there were nods. Small ones. A subtle shift of posture. Acknowledgement settling into the marrow of the room. Blake stood abruptly. "So what now?" he asked. "You want to drag this out? Make a spectacle?" I shook my head. "The spectacle already happened yesterday," I said softly. "You made sure of that. I'm here to clean up, not perform." His jaw clenched. I apologized. "No," I said. "You explained. That's different." He opened his mouth, closed it, and looked away. I walked to the table and picked up the pen Helen had placed there. A sleek, chrome thing with the Helix Gate logo etched into it, something Blake had once spent an absurd amount of money designing for investor gifts. I signed the documents quietly, quickly, no flourish, no hesitation. When I finished, I placed the pen back down. "I'll push the updates," I said. "Systems will be restored gradually over the next few hours. You'll be operational by end of day." Engineers straightened with visible relief. "But before I do," I continued, turning back to the gathered staff, "I want to make one thing clear." The room held its breath. "I'm not here to punish anyone who wasn't part of what happened. I'm not here to destroy Helix Gate. I built this place. I bled for it. I care about it more than anyone in this room except maybe the people who spent nights in the server closet rewriting functions with me." A few engineers let out choked laughs at that. "But," I said, letting the words settle, "the era of pretending I didn't build this is over." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Silence did the work. Maya stepped forward a little, shoulders squared, a quiet pillar behind me. I caught her eye and nodded. "I'll speak at the next all hands," I said. "Not as Blake's wife. Not as the person behind the curtain. As CTO and co-founder." Blake inhaled sharply. "That's traditionally your stage?" I said. "Yes, I'm aware." A beat of quiet. "We can share it," I added. It wasn't mercy. It wasn't even compromise. It was realism. The company needed stability. But everyone in this room now understood who they were dealing with. The blinds to the hallway opened slightly as someone outside shifted to get a better view. Word was traveling fast. Helen checked her watch. "We should address the patent challenge before we adjourn," she said. "Our outside counsel will need Evelyn's documentation immediately." "It's ready," I said. "I'll upload it to a secure drive for legal access only." "Good," Helen said. "We'll file before close of business." Sienna's absence hovered like a cold draft. A severed limb from the organism we'd all pretended was healthy. "One more thing," Victor said, leaning forward. "We'll need a formal communication to clients explaining the temporary outage." "I'll draft it," I said, straightforward, transparent, technical where it needs to be, reassuring where it matters. "Good," he said. "Coming from you, they'll believe it." Blake flinched again, subtle, but I saw it. He wasn't the company's voice anymore. Not fully, not exclusively, maybe not at all. Helen closed her laptop completely, signaling the end of the formal meeting. Chairs scraped. People shifted. Some hesitated, wanting to say something but not sure what. A few approached me directly. Jason was first. "For what it's worth," he said, voice low. "You deserved this years ago." "I know," I said. He gave a small nod and stepped away. Daniel approached next, tired but sincere. "If you need anything from finance to restructure budgets around the new licensing terms, just tell me." "Thank you," I said. "We'll talk tomorrow." He nodded and left. Others filtered out slowly, offering quiet congratulations, apologies, tentative respect. Some avoided my eyes entirely. That was fine. I wasn't doing this for validation. Maya stayed behind, hovering near the wall until the last of the crowd thinned. When the door finally closed again, leaving only the board, Blake, Helen, and me, she stepped closer. "That was..." She shook her head, searching for a word. "Something. It needed to happen," I said. even if I wish it hadn't been necessary. Are you okay? She asked softly. I considered the question. Not emotionally, logically, responsibly. Then I nodded. I will be. Blake rose from his chair. I need a minute alone with my wife. I didn't look at him. I'm not your wife right now, I said. I'm your CTO. A muscle in his cheek jumped. Helen cleared her throat lightly. This isn't the time for personal discussions, she said. We have legal matters to address, Blake. If you need a moment, take it after we adjourn. He looked like he wanted to argue but stopped himself. Growth, maybe. Or defeat. Hard to tell the difference on him these days. The board began gathering their belongings, murmuring about next steps, deadlines, crisis comms, repair strategies. Eventually, only Blake and I remained. The room felt bigger without the crowd, quieter, more dangerous. Blake moved toward the window, staring down at the streets below, where cars looked like tiny fragments of someone else's story. Was all of that really necessary? He asked. Yes, I said. It was. He didn't turn around. You blindsided me. You humiliated me, I replied, on a live stream watched by the entire company. He flinched. I made a mistake. You made a choice, I said. That's different. He squeezed the edge of the window frame. I trusted you. The laughter in my chest was bitter and quiet. No, I said. You trusted that I wouldn't fight back. He swallowed hard. What happens now? We fix the company, I said. Then we'll figure out the rest. He nodded, but it was the hollow nod of someone struggling to recognize the shape of the future. I walked to the door, hand on the handle. Blake, I said without turning, this is the last time you'll underestimate me. I didn't wait for his answer. I stepped into the hall. The door closed behind me with a soft, irrevocable click. I didn't go back to my office right away. Not yet. My head was buzzing too sharply, like static buzzing against a metal fence. Instead, I walked into the smaller legal conference room 2 doors down, the only place on the executive floor where the windows didn't face the street, but the alley quiet, narrow, shadowed, a place where sound softened, a place where thinking felt possible. Helen followed a few seconds later, closing the door with a soft, deliberate click. She set her laptop down, exhaled slowly, then looked at me with that measured calm only lawyers and surgeons ever seem to master. You okay? She asked. Define okay. I said. She almost smiled. Functional, I nodded. Functional, yes. Helen sat across from me and opened her laptop. The glow lit her face in pale blue. We have to move fast on the patent filing, she said. I've reviewed the preliminary documentation you sent, but I'll need everything. Full version histories, Git logs, internal memos, any design documents, anything that proves origin. I have all of it, I said. 7 years worth. She blinked, impressed despite already expecting as much. Most founders don't document this thoroughly. Most founders don't get erased by the person they built a company with, I replied. Helen paused. Evelyn, what Sienna attempted, that's not just corporate theft. That's intentional fraud, strategic misrepresentation, and potentially extortion if we can prove she planned to use the patent as leverage. She did, I said quietly. Helen looked up. You have proof. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder I hadn't shown in the boardroom. Not because I'd forgotten, but because timing mattered. Pressure mattered. Truth hit hardest when the room wasn't already choking on adrenaline. I slid the folder toward her. You should read this. She opened it. The first page was an email. The header alone drained the color from her face. From sienna.cole@helixgate.com. To blake.turner@helixgate.com. Subject: Strategic Safeguard. Beneath it, the body of the email, no formatting, no pleasantries, just 2 sentences that could sink careers. If we lock down the IP under my name, the board can't push you out so easily. We both know Evelyn won't fight it until it's too late. Helen closed the folder slowly, pressing her fingertips to the cover like she needed to ground herself. This, she whispered, this is catastrophic for them. Good catastrophic or bad catastrophic? I asked. For you? Good. Very good. For Blake and Sienna? She leaned back. This is a nuclear-grade checkmate. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just breathed in. Slowly, deeply, a breath that had been pinned under my ribs for months, maybe years. Helen composed herself, reopening the folder. How long have you had this email? 2 years. She looked up sharply. You kept it. I keep everything. Why didn't you use it sooner? Because I wasn't trying to win, I said. I was trying to believe in something that wasn't real anymore. Another silence. Softer this time. Helen gathered the papers into a stack. This proves intent. It proves premeditation. It proves conspiracy to misrepresent ownership. She tapped the folder. And it proves Blake either participated or knowingly allowed it. He'll say he didn't agree to the plan, I said. That doesn't matter. He received the email. He didn't report it. He didn't shut it down. Legally, that's complicity. Complicit. The word settled in the room like dust. What do you want to do with this? She asked. Whatever protects the work, I said. And whatever sets the record straight. That's already happening, Helen said. But this? This changes the scale. You're not just defending IP anymore. You're proving deliberate sabotage. She studied me for a moment. And you're still calm. I've been preparing for this, I said. Longer than I realized. Helen nodded once. Decisive. Then, let's continue. We spent the next 20 minutes narrowing the strategy. I provided access keys to encrypted folders. She confirmed timestamps, authorship, and authentication logs. Every file I'd ever touched had a signature, my signature embedded beneath the layers of architecture. A fingerprint across 7 years of sleepless nights, caffeine-fueled fixes, and silent resilience. When we were done, Helen closed her laptop and stood. Evelyn, she said quietly, you're not just winning this battle. You're rewriting the rules. I'm restoring them, I corrected. Either way, she said, Blake is about to face consequences he never imagined. I didn't answer. My silence was enough. Helen left to prepare the legal filings, the door clicking behind her. I sat alone in the still room, the hum of air conditioning whispering through the vents. Outside the window, the alley was empty, except for a single pigeon pecking at crumbs near a dumpster. My hands rested flat on the table. Steady. Controlled. Truth isn't loud. Truth doesn't scream. Truth waits. And when it arrives like this quiet, sharp, irrefutable. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You think you've won. This isn't over. No name. No signature. But the area code told me enough. Sienna. I deleted the message without replying. Some battles weren't worth acknowledging. Not when the war was already tilting. I stood, smoothing my blazer, and stepped out into the hallway. Staff scattered quickly, unsure whether to make eye contact, unsure what version of me they just witnessed in the executive meeting. I didn't mind. Their confusion wasn't my problem. My only task now was to finish this. Because the truth had landed, and the counter-move was just beginning. I didn't go to my office. I went to Blake's. Not to confront him. Not yet, but because it was empty. He'd stepped out for some kind of crisis control call, leaving the door ajar and lights dimmed. His office looked different now, less like the center of power, and more like the hollow shell of a man trying to hold on to something slipping through his fingers. I stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood and stale coffee. Photos lined the wall. Blake shaking hands with investors. Blake on stage at conferences. Blake posing with teams he barely recognized now. My face appeared in only one of them, a small frame on a shelf, from the company's early days, before the brand consultants suggested a more marketable narrative. I reached for the frame. Studied it. We were sitting on the floor of our old apartment, laughing over pizza boxes and tangled cables. We looked young, exhausted, hungry, equal. I set the frame back down, not gently. On the desk was his laptop, open but locked, blinking with the faint blue glow of the sleep screen. Next to it, a notebook lay open, handwritten notes from meetings, to-do lists, half-sketched diagrams he'd tried to pass off as architectural insights. But one page near the back stopped me. It was dated 3 weeks earlier. At the top, underlined twice, were the words, "If she leaves, we lose everything." Below that, a list. Shift visibility to Sienna. Reduce Evelyn's authority. Limit access to architecture. Frame decisions as performance issues. Build narrative for board. Patent alternative IP path. My fingers curled around the edge of the desk. People talk about betrayal like it's a stab. Sudden, sharp, dramatic. But this was slow poison. Measured, planned, executed in steps. I took a photo of the page. Evidence, not because I needed more leverage, but because patterns matter. Motives matter. Truth matters. I left the notebook open on the desk, exactly where I found it, and turned toward the door. Helen found me in the hallway. "We're ready to file," she said. "Outside counsel is standing by." "Good," I said. "There's something else." I showed her the photo from Blake's notebook. Her eyebrows lifted. Intent again. Undeniable intent. "Evelyn, this cements everything. It's not for legal use," I said. "It's for clarity." "For you?" "For him." She studied me. "Are you planning to confront him with it?" "No," I said. "He already knows I know. He just doesn't know what that means yet." We walked together to the elevator. She pressed the button for the legal floor. "Before you go," she said, "there's one more thing. A detail I didn't mention earlier because I wanted to confirm it. I waited. The patent Sienna filed? She listed Blake as her witness. Heat crawled up my spine. Of course she did. Don't worry, Helen said. It doesn't bind him legally, but it speaks volumes. It speaks the truth, I said. The elevator dinged. Helen stepped in. Evelyn, she said, holding the door. This is more than a victory. This is a precedent. For every woman who's ever been written out of her own work. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She saw the answer in my eyes. When the doors closed, I stood alone in the hallway again. Minutes passed before Blake returned to his office. I didn't hide. I wanted him to see me standing there. He stopped halfway down the hall. His face shifted through 3 expressions in quick succession: shock, guilt, then something like resignation. You were in my office, he said. Yes. You looked through my things. Yes. He rubbed his forehead. Evelyn, I cut him off. I didn't have to look hard. You left it open. You can't. I'm not here to argue, I said. I'm here so you understand what happens next. He swallowed. What does happen next? The truth, I said. All of it. He stepped closer. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't move. You meant to contain me. That's worse. His shoulders sagged. What do you want from me? Nothing, I said. I want what's mine. And I already have it. He closed his eyes like absorbing the blow. If you're going to punish me, this isn't punishment. This is consequence. His eyes opened. For the first time, he looked genuinely scared. I'll lose everything, he whispered. No, I said. You'll lose the illusion that you built it alone. Silence stretched between us, thin, taut, final. Then I stepped away, leaving him standing in the hallway like a man realizing the ground beneath him had never been solid. I made my way toward the server command room. Every engineer I passed straightened instinctively, as though recognizing the shift in hierarchy before it was announced. Inside the command room, servers hummed with a familiar sound, steady, constant, loyal. My work. My fingerprints. My legacy. I placed my hand on the console. I'm here, I whispered, and the system answered with the soft, rhythmic pulse of machines returning to life like a heartbeat sinking back into place after being knocked off rhythm. The countermove was complete. Now all that remained was the aftermath. 3 months later, the city felt different to me. Quieter, though nothing in New York was ever truly quiet. It wasn't the noise around me that had changed, it was the noise inside me. For the first time in years, my mind wasn't a battlefield. The constant hum of anticipation, of bracing for the next undercut, the next dismissal, the next quiet theft, it was gone. Replaced by something unfamiliar and almost disorienting at first. Peace. Real peace. Not the fragile, temporary kind that cracks the moment someone raises their voice or opens their mouth to rewrite history. This was a deeper kind, the kind that settles into your bones after you stop trying to carry a weight that was never meant to be yours. My condo was still sparse, clean lines, open space, nothing unnecessary. But the silence wasn't sterile anymore. It was restful. I'd bought a new couch, a deep blue one that looked like midnight folded into fabric. Blake would have hated it. That fact alone made buying it feel like liberation. Some mornings, I sat on it with the city stretching out beneath my windows, the mug in my hands warm and familiar. Built, not bought. The same mug, but not the same meaning. It wasn't a reminder of surviving late nights or being the invisible half of a tech empire. Now it was a symbol of choosing myself without apology. Helix Gate had stabilized under the new structure. My role as CTO and board director was official, visible, undeniable. The engineers who used to bypass me now came directly to my office, not out of fear, but respect. Real respect. The kind that doesn't need to be demanded or defended. The systems were cleaner, more secure, redesigned under a hybrid framework I'd been wanting to implement for years, but never had the authority to push through. Investors seemed relieved. Clients were reassured. The company survived because truth is a stronger foundation than myth. As for Blake, the fallout hit fast. 2 months after the patent scandal, the board voted unanimously to remove him as CEO. They softened the language, transition, mutual agreement, strategic realignment. But the truth was clear. He lost the title he'd shaped his identity around. He moved to Denver for a consulting role with a mid-size firm. Rumors said he was trying to rebuild, stay low, figure out who he was without the empire he thought he built. I didn't attend the farewell gathering they threw for him at the office. I didn't need closure in the form of speeches or catered appetizers or forced nostalgia. My closure had happened in that hallway, when he asked what happens next, and I told him the only truth that mattered: consequences. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns hot, then burns out. What remained was clarity, clean and cold and sharp. Sienna disappeared completely from the industry for a while. Then, quietly, she resurfaced at a struggling cybersecurity startup in Austin. Her title was inflated, but everyone knew the real story. When your name is linked to attempted IP theft, doors close faster than you can knock on them. I didn't follow her updates closely. She wasn't my problem anymore. She never really had been. She was just the spark. Blake had been the fuel. A year after the boardroom confrontation, something happened I didn't expect. I opened Aegisphere Labs with Nolan, a project that began as a side idea, then grew into something real. A clean slate research hub where I could build without constraints, without politics, without being told someone else should deliver my work because they looked better on stage. Investors lined up quickly. I didn't need their validation, but I accepted their capital. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had spent 7 years being erased was now the architect of 2 companies at once. But that wasn't the victory. The victory came in quieter forms, like walking into my office at Aegisphere and seeing sunlight hit the whiteboard, illuminating sketches of architectures no one could claim but me. Like the feeling of writing code at midnight because I wanted to, not because I needed to prove anything. Like the comfort of knowing I didn't have to shrink for someone else's ego ever again. And then there was Oliver. He came into my life slowly, almost accidentally, a data scientist with a habit of asking thoughtful questions and listening to the answers. Really listening. His presence was steady, warm, unthreatened by my strength, unafraid of my history. We didn't rush anything. We didn't define it too quickly. But he cooked for me sometimes. Pasta with garlic and lemon. And in the dim kitchen light he would tell me stories about the strange corners of machine learning research. And for the first time, I felt something close to softness return. Not weakness, not dependency, just softness. The kind that comes from safety. Late at night, when the city lights pulsed against the windows like a heartbeat, he'd wrap his arms around me from behind and say, "You know you move differently now." And I'd answer, "Because I'm not carrying anything that belongs to someone else." 2 years after everything imploded, I found myself standing on the rooftop terrace of Aegisphere, watching the city breathe beneath me. The skyline wasn't just a skyline anymore. It was a map of every choice I'd made, every line of architecture I'd built, every boundary I'd redrawn. The air smelled like rain and concrete, with a hint of something hopeful rising from the streets below. A younger version of me would have been in some server room right now, hunched over logs, chasing approval that no one planned to give. This version? She knew better. A notification buzzed on my phone, a reminder about the advisory board call scheduled for the following morning. Investors wanted updates on our new distributed security framework, something I'd been sketching on whiteboards and napkins for months. It was the first time I'd developed something purely out of curiosity rather than survival. Building without fear is different. Lighter, sharper, more dangerous in all the best ways. Inside the office behind me, the glass walls were covered in diagrams, arrows, layers, problem statements, jokes scribbled in the margins by the engineers who now treated the space like a playground instead of a pressure chamber. Nolan walked by carrying a tray of coffees, saw me through the glass, and tapped the window with a grin before disappearing down the hall. Leadership didn't have to mean casting a shadow over everyone else. Sometimes it meant leaving the lights on so others could see more clearly. I sipped from my old mug, built, not bought, and for the first time, I understood the full meaning of it. I hadn't built a company. I'd built myself back from being erased. I'd built a life that wasn't held together by someone else's permission. Blake and I finalized our divorce a little over a year after the boardroom confrontation. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't a dramatic finale. It was paperwork and signatures, and 2 people sitting across from each other, realizing they had stopped being partners long before they stopped being married. He tried to apologize again at the end. A real apology this time, one that didn't hide behind excuses or panic. "I didn't know how to share power," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "But you could have learned." He looked at me then with something like regret, but not the kind that aches for repair, the kind that accepts the lesson too late. We parted peacefully. Not friends, but not enemies. Just 2 stories that had stopped running parallel. Sometimes I wondered if he ever watched Helix Gate's progress from afar, if he knew the architecture had evolved past what it once was, if he understood that the company flourished only when the invisible work became visible. He never reached out again. Neither did I. As for Sienna, I heard her startup folded. A quiet failure, one of many in an industry built on ego, risk, and reinvention. I didn't take pleasure in it, but I didn't mourn it either. Actions leave trails. Some people follow them to growth, others to collapse. She chose her path, and it led her exactly where it was always going to. What mattered was where mine led me. One evening, Oliver came over carrying 2 bags of groceries and a bottle of wine. He moved through my kitchen with ease now, like he'd memorized where everything lived. The smell of garlic and basil filled the air while he sliced vegetables and told me about a paper he'd been reading on anomaly detection. He always talked in this steady, grounded way, like nothing about my ambition intimidated him. In his pauses, he'd look at me with this quiet certainty, and I'd feel the gentleness of a future that didn't require me to break myself to fit. After dinner, we stepped onto the balcony. The wind brushed against my skin, cool and alive. The city buzzed beneath us, restless but familiar. Oliver leaned on the railing beside me. "You've changed," he said. "Everyone does." "Not like you," he answered. "You didn't break. You recalibrated." I laughed softly. "That's one word for it." "It's the right word," he said. "You rebuilt the system without crashing it." I thought about that. About all the ways people had tried to write over my work, my voice, my name. About how the world often expected women in my position to fight small, to shrink, to accept partial credit for full labor. About the long nights, the cold mornings, the meetings where I'd swallowed truth so someone else could feel tall. And then I thought about now, about standing in my own company, in my own space, in my own life. "You know what I learned?" I said quietly. "Being underestimated is a temporary condition. Staying underestimated is a choice." Oliver looked at me like he already knew the ending of my sentence before I spoke it, and I stopped choosing that. I finished. The city hummed. The sky stretched wide. The lights below flickered like circuitry waking up. My story didn't end in that boardroom. It didn't end with signatures or titles or public statements. It didn't even end with revenge. It ended with truth, and it continued with freedom. Before you go, if any part of Evelyn's journey reminded you of your own being overlooked, underestimated, or written out of a story you built, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. This channel exists for people who've learned to stand back up even when no one expected them to. Tell me in the comments, which moment hit you hardest? The suspension on Livestream? The patent reveal? Or the final stand? Your story matters here.